It all starts in a quiet Minnesota suburb in 2016. The man's name was Stephen Carl Allwine, and he appeared to be a loving father, a dutiful husband, and a respected leader in his church. On the surface, everything seemed normal. One of those families that waves hello when you walk by, always mowing the lawn on Saturday mornings, kids playing in the yard, that kind of picture. But what no one knew was that Stephen had become obsessed with the dark web, specifically a site that claimed to offer murder-for-hire services in exchange for Bitcoin. In many ways, Stephen was the last person you'd expect to be fumbling around the underbelly of the internet. He'd been married to his wife, Amy, for years. They'd even adopted a child together. Most people at church saw him as a man of strong moral character. He served as an elder in the congregation, guiding others on matters of faith. But behind those pious appearances lurked a different reality. Stephen had grown disenchanted with his marriage, and he was secretly involved with multiple women online. Feeling trapped by his marriage but too cowardly to divorce, Stephen decided to go to a site called Besa Mafia, a notorious dark web platform that claimed to hook people up with contract killers. Its pitch was simple. Give us some Bitcoin, and your problem goes away forever. Stephen was convinced he'd discovered the perfect anonymous solution to get rid of his wife. No messy divorce, no awkward conversations, no losing face in his tight-knit religious community. Just instant relief, hidden behind digital coin transfers. Of course, many of these murder-for-hire sites on the dark web are scams. They advertise like a chilling marketplace for hit jobs, but their main goal is to cheat people out of money. Stephen didn't know that. He began sending messages under a pseudonym, demanding proof of service, haggling over the price to have his wife eliminated. He thought it was all hush-hush because to him, Bitcoin was untraceable, like a cloak of invisibility in the digital realm. He was wrong on multiple fronts. First, the site was known for ripping people off. Second, Bitcoin transactions leave a public ledger on the blockchain. While it's not as straightforward as following a bank statement, skilled investigators can often piece together who sent what and where it went. But Stephen, blinded by desperation, pressed on. Weeks passed, and the so-called hitman kept making excuses. They needed more time. They got delayed. They needed an extra payment because the job got riskier. Meanwhile, Stephen was getting more anxious by the day. He was still going to church, smiling politely at neighbors, even offering marital advice to other couples, all while checking his dark web inbox, hoping to see "it's done." But that update never came. At some point in late 2016, Stephen realized he might be getting scammed. Any other person with a conscience would have breathed a sigh of relief and backed out of this horrifying plan. But Stephen didn't stop. He had grown so determined, some might say obsessed, that if the hitmen-for-hire route wasn't going to work, he would handle it himself. On November 13, 2016, authorities received a frantic 911 call from Stephen. He said he'd come home and found Amy lying on the floor, bleeding. He told the operator it looked like a suicide, that she had shot herself in despair. Police rushed to the scene. Amy had a single gunshot wound to her head. A handgun was placed in a bizarre position, almost as if it was staged. She wasn't breathing, and there was a disturbing lack of blood spatter for a supposed self-inflicted gunshot. The second the investigators stepped into the room, they sensed something wasn't adding up. Stephen stuck to his story, saying Amy had suffered bouts of depression. He played the grieving husband card, acting torn apart by his wife's suicide. But detectives couldn't ignore the evidence. They noticed the blood patterns were inconsistent with a typical suicide. There was also the matter of Stephen's phone records, computer logs, and eventually a forensic dive into his finances. What they found behind the scenes was jaw-dropping. It turned out that Stephen had been lurking on the dark web for months, sending messages to a murder-for-hire site about his wife. Investigators also traced suspicious Bitcoin transactions. It was complicated, sure, but not impossible for digital forensics experts. They discovered Stephen had used an online exchange to convert his money into Bitcoin, which he then transferred to the site. Emails tied to those transactions contained references to Amy, including photos of her, her work schedule, and suggestions on how to make it look like an accident. Even more damning, the medical examiner's report indicated the angle of the bullet, and the overall crime scene was wildly inconsistent with a self-inflicted wound. In other words, the conclusion was someone else shot Amy. And given Stephen's digital footprint along with his half-baked staging of a suicide, it became clear who that someone was. The deeper authorities dug, the more twisted the story grew. Stephen had set up multiple fake social media profiles to chat with potential romantic partners. One was a woman from another state he seemed keen on meeting. He confided in her that he was unhappy in his marriage and didn't see a future with Amy. The detectives also found out that Stephen's calm outward appearance cracked in private. He was terrified of being exposed, both for his infidelity and for the lengths he was willing to go to get rid of his wife. At trial, the prosecutors laid out every grim detail. They showed the jury transcripts from the dark website, which read like something out of a horror film. Stephen casually discussing payment amounts, offering specific details about Amy's habits, and insisting that her death appear to be a random crime or an accident. When that plan failed, he shot her himself. Perhaps the most unsettling part was that after the murder, he walked around the house, deliberately messing with the scene to make it look like Amy had taken her own life, then called 911 pretending to be a devastated husband. The trial shocked the local community. Friends from church were stunned. How could this man, this soft-spoken elder, always ready with a kind word, be capable of such brutality? But there it was, in black and white, on the screen in the courtroom. Evidence of how Stephen asked total strangers on the dark web to kill his wife for Bitcoin. In 2018, Stephen Allwine was found guilty of first-degree murder and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Members of the jury described feeling horror and disgust at how calculated the crime was. The judge, reading the final verdict, didn't mince words about the cruelty and cowardice behind it. So if you've ever doubted how dark the dark web can get, or how cryptocurrency can be used in sinister ways, look no further than this case. The anonymity promised by the dark web turned out to be a flimsy illusion. And the victim was someone who trusted Stephen enough to share a life and a home with him. Sure, the story is disturbing, but it's also eye-opening. While the technology itself, Bitcoin, Tor, dark web forums, can be used for many harmless or even beneficial purposes, in the wrong hands, it becomes a chilling tool. And behind every perfect crime fantasy, there's usually a trail that leads right back to the perpetrator. If you want more No Sleep Tonight stories like this one, consider subscribing. There are more unsettling true tales out there, and I'm here to bring them into the light.